Today, if the RBA were a company, the governor would be out of a job. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Well, that is Post, covering finance and property news. Well, Alan Kohler in the New Daily wrote a quite interesting piece relating to the recent RBA review. And he argued, in fact, that the Treasurer should go further with regard to the independence of the RBA. Now, that was an interesting take, but he also made some quite important points with regard to accountability. He said the Treasurer should take one further step in his response to the RBA review. Even though this step is not in the recommendations, let the board appoint the governor. And if he can't come to that, which would be understandable, he said, even though he's going to make the RBA completely independent for the first time, then have the new Monetary Policy Board, not Treasury, draw up the short list of candidates and give them the power to sack the governor, or at least recommend his or her sacking. He went on to say, what screams out in the review is that if the RBA were a company, the board would have and should have sacked Philip Lowe long ago, but they couldn't, they knew it, and he knew it. The result is that the governor can ride roughshod over the board with greatest respect and courtesy, of course, but also with impunity. And apparently Philip Lowe did so. One act alone, contained in a paragraph on page 47 of the review, was sackable. It came at the moment in October 2020 when the RBA, having cut the cash rate to 0.1%, introduced what's called calendar-based guidance by saying that interest rates were not expected to go up for 3 years. The panel says the Reserve Bank Board did not receive any written briefings proposing calendar-based forward guidance before it was introduced by the governor in a speech in mid-October 2020. In other words, one of the most consequential monetary policy statements ever made by the RBA for the economy, Australians' lives, and the reputation of the bank was simply announced in a speech by the governor without telling the board. But that's just one of the staggering number of times, according to the review, that the board was kept in the dark, either because they weren't told or didn't ask. In his press conference last week, Philip Lowe said that part of the review didn't resonate with me. The idea that the board members sit there meekly and accept the recommendations that I put to them is very far from the reality that I have lived, he said. So unless the review panel has published lies, or the governor is deluded, he must be saying that the board members did complain and made life difficult for him, and he ignored them. Here's a few more quotes from the review. Between 2016 and 2019, the Reserve Bank Board never took a decision that went against the recommendations of the RBA executive. The Reserve Bank Board was not provided with, and on the available evidence did not demand enough information in advance to fully debate and challenge the key design choices for the tools proposed by the RBA executive. The review's assessment is that the Reserve Bank Board did not receive or request sufficient material to support a robust debate. There is evidence that the Reserve Bank Board is not always fully involved in the decisions. The Reserve Bank Board did not have the opportunity to contribute to what was a significant policy decision that they were responsible for. And there were significant gaps in the information available to the Reserve Bank Board, and the review is unaware of any board requests for information on this topic. And papers provided to the Reserve Bank Board throughout 2021 contained little discussion of the risks posed by non-wage sources of inflation, and so on. There are plenty more like that. So it sure looks like the board sat there meekly and munched the kibble they were fed, although of course neither the governor nor the board have acknowledged that. And you would expect them all to deny it vehemently, of course, which the governor is doing, while the board as usual keeps mum, which by the way is something the review panel wants to stop. It's recommending that the directors should also get to make speeches. But whatever has been going on in the board meetings, or rather has not been going on, the fact is that the directors can't sack the governor, and so they are ultimately powerless. They can only whinge and grizzle, and judging by what Philip Lowe said about them not being meek, that's probably what they did. Central bank governors are always appointed by the government of the day, and that's unlikely to change, but perhaps the power imbalance could be addressed by allowing the board to recommend the governor to be removed, with the government required to have a good reason for refusing. And the panel is also pretty scathing about the RBA's communication efforts because the communications function is insufficiently positioned in the organisational structure to provide influential strategic communications advice. Read that as saying that the PR folks are buried and ignored. In other central banks, the communications director reports directly to the governor, like at the Bank of England, or the deputy governor at the Bank of Canada, because communication is an important function of any central bank. At the RBA, it's within the Secretary's department and reports to just a manager. And there should be more press conferences, the panel says, not just when the RBA has something to say, which is of course the current practice, but because observers may have questions to ask at other times. And one of the more important outcomes of the review could end up being a new focus on the RBA's objectives, which has been unchanged since 1959, when Mr. Squiggle first appeared on TV, which is probably unconnected. The objectives are the stability of the currency of Australia, the maintenance of full employment in Australia, and the economic prosperity and welfare of the people of Australia. The panel wants the third one to be an overall purpose of the institution, and presumably, therefore, not one of the objectives, and it wants the other two to have equal weight. Not only that, there should be a transparent definition of full employment. That could make a difference to the level of interest rates, unlike the other recommendations of the panel, which, well, just make the RBA better run and monetary policy less of a dog's breakfast. Now, two observations here. Firstly, I've already said the problem I have with complete independence of the RBA is that the RBA is unelected, the board members are unelected, they've got no accountability, and frankly, nobody can give them a steer if they're going off in their own sweet way. This, of course, is precisely the same issue with central banks in other countries too. And in fact, politicians want to distance themselves from monetary policy because it gets a bit sticky sometimes, and actually sometimes interest rates need to go up when politicians don't really want them to. Remember, of course, that as rates rise, house prices fall. So there is an intuition amongst politicians to distance themselves from the Reserve Bank or the central bank in other countries. But then there's a question of accountability. And frankly, to my mind, no one has been able to work out how to make central banks accountable for their decisions. That's the real question. And I don't think that the recommendations from this review are getting close to tackling that. And here's the point. If you swing the dial towards political accountability, in other words, the Treasurer has ultimate veto on what the Reserve Bank is doing, then the question of independence comes up. Whereas if you swing the dial the other way and give the central bank complete independence, then they have no checks and balances. Their appearances before Parliament are always a bit, well, just a bit of a show, really. And so we've got this real problem. The Reserve Bank is not connected enough to real Australians and real businesses to understand the implications of their decisions on real people. They have this theoretical model of the way that the economy works, and that includes this so-called Martin model, of course. And as a result of that, they're making decisions theoretically in a vacuum based on an assumption about the way the economy actually works. The problem is, reality goes down a different path. Therefore, we have a Reserve Bank that is actually not working in the interests of the people. We have the political class who doesn't want to get more involved, in fact, we prefer to get less involved. And we have, therefore, no real essential outcome that is going to drive the economy in the right direction. Now, as I discussed with Robbie Barwick last week, the truth is that you need to have clear accountability to the RBA. And you need to have those elected taking appropriate accountability and responsibility for what's going on. At the moment, everybody can say it's not my problem and they can look elsewhere. And of course, the RBA and APRA is doing that with house prices. The Treasurer is doing it with interest rates. And so everybody can say, not my problem. The difficulty is those decisions hit real people and real businesses. And frankly, at the moment, I think we're completely off in the fairies, because actually the real economic indicators look significantly worse than those would want us to recognise. And that means potentially recession quite soon and more difficulty down the track. Unfortunately, accountability slips past once again. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.